The wine was a deep, impossible red in the crystal glass, a perfect mirror for the sprawling galaxy of Tokyo lights 20 floors below. Nia Adebayo held the stem, not drinking, just watching the city breathe. This was the moment she'd worked for. The culmination of sleepless nights, of condescending board meetings, of being the only woman, the only black woman, in rooms that smelled of old money and older prejudice. Her tech company, her baby, had just secured a preliminary partnership that would put them on the global map. Tonight, she was celebrating alone, and she preferred it that way. It was a quiet, sharp-edged satisfaction she wanted to savor without dilution. Her gaze drifted across the hushed, elegant space of the restaurant. It was a place of shadows and whispers, where deals were made and broken over plates of food that looked more like art than sustenance. Her eyes landed on a man at a corner table, table 12. He was alone, too. She couldn't see his face, hidden as it was in the deliberate dimness, but she saw the form of him. The severe, perfect cut of a charcoal Tom Ford suit. The way his shoulders filled it, suggesting a disciplined strength beneath the fine wool. One hand rested on the white linen of the table, relaxed but utterly still. At the edge of his immaculate white cuff, she saw it, a sliver of ink. A tattoo of deep, intricate blue and black scales, the tail of some mythical beast disappearing under the fabric. He radiated a kind of gravitational pull, a stillness, so absolute it was more commanding than any sound. Nia looked away, a faint unease prickling her skin. She was used to commanding rooms herself, but her power was built on data, on logic, on the relentless force of her intellect. His was something else entirely, something ancient and predatory. She dismissed the thought, lifting her glass to her lips. She was letting the atmosphere of the city get to her. That was when the shadows at the edge of her vision resolved into men. 3 of them, dressed in sharp, ill-fitting black suits that screamed off-the-rack ambition. They didn't belong here. Their presence was a discordant note in the symphony of quiet wealth. They moved together, a tight, menacing formation, and stopped at her table. The man in the center leaned forward, placing his thick-knuckled hands on her table. He smelled of cheap cologne and stale smoke. "You are enjoying the view?" he asked in heavily accented English. His smile was a greasy, unpleasant thing. Nia placed her glass down with deliberate calm. She kept her posture open, her hands visible. Years of negotiating with hostile investors had taught her how to project confidence even when her heart was hammering against her ribs. She said, her voice even. "Is there something I can help you with?" "We think so," the man grunted. His 2 companions fanned out slightly, subtly blocking her only exit from the booth. "You are a guest in our city. It is polite to introduce yourself to your hosts." "I think you have the wrong person," Nia said, her eyes flicking from one to the other. They were trying to intimidate her. That much was obvious. A shakedown, maybe? Or something worse. "I'm here on business." "I don't know you." The leader chuckled, a low, guttural sound. "Oh, we know you. We know who you're meeting, who you are waiting for. He cannot protect you forever." The words made no sense. She wasn't meeting anyone, but the certainty in his voice was chilling. He truly believed he knew who she was. He gestured at her half-empty glass. "A beautiful woman should not drink alone. Let us buy you another." His hand moved to touch her arm. It happened without a sound. One moment the man's hand was reaching for her, the next, another hand had intercepted it, closing around his wrist. The grip was not violent, but the effect was instantaneous. The suited man froze, his face paling, his eyes wide with a sudden, visceral fear. Nia's gaze followed the arm up to its owner. It was the man from table 12. He had moved so silently she hadn't even registered his approach. Now, standing beside her table, he seemed to absorb all the light and sound in the room. His face was starkly handsome, carved from stone and shadow, with high cheekbones and a mouth that looked like it had never formed a smile. But it was his eyes that held her. They were dark, almost black, and utterly devoid of emotion. They were the eyes of a man who had seen everything and felt nothing. He still held the other man's wrist. He didn't squeeze, didn't apply pressure. He just held it. The sliver of dragon tattoo was now fully visible, a complex tapestry of cobalt and onyx coiling around his wrist. Kenjiro, the man from Table 12 said. His voice was low, a quiet rumble that cut through the silence. It was like the sound of stones grinding together deep underground. You are a long way from your territory, and you are disturbing my meal. The man, Kenjiro, seemed to shrink. The blustering arrogance evaporated, replaced by a raw, animal terror. Ishikawa-sama, he stammered, bowing his head as much as the grip would allow. A misunderstanding. We were just leaving. Ishikawa. The name echoed in the silence. Nia didn't know it, but she saw the effect it had on the men around her, the way the other patrons in the restaurant were now studiously looking anywhere else. Ishikawa released the man's wrist. He didn't shove him. He simply let go. Kenjiro stumbled back, cradling his hand as if it were broken. He bowed low, a gesture of profound submission, and his two thugs did the same. Without another word, they turned and practically fled from the restaurant. The silence they left behind was heavier than the noise they had made. Nia stared at the man beside her, her mind racing to process what had just happened. He wasn't a businessman. He wasn't a politician. He was something else, something that made men like that bow and scrape in fear. He finally turned his gaze to her. For the first time, his dark eyes focused on her completely, and it felt like a physical touch. It was an analytical, assessing look that missed nothing. The fine weave of her beige dress, the tension in her shoulders, the rapid pulse she could feel beating in her own throat. "They will not bother you again," he said. The statement was absolute, a law of nature he had just dictated. Then he added, his voice leaving no room for argument. "But you will come with me now. It is no longer safe for you here." It wasn't a question. It wasn't an offer. It was a command, delivered with the quiet certainty of a man who had never been disobeyed. He had just saved her, but Nia had the sudden, chilling feeling that she had just been plunged into a much deeper, more dangerous world. The choice had been taken from her. She was now his problem to solve. The ride through Shinjuku was a blur of neon and silence. The black sedan moved through traffic with an unnatural ease, as if the river of cars parted for it. Nia sat stiffly on the plush leather, acutely aware of Kaido Ishikawa beside her. He didn't look at her. He stared out the window, his profile a chiseled silhouette against the vibrant chaos of the city. The air in the car was thick with the scent of expensive leather and something else, something that clung to him, a clean, sharp fragrance of cedar and smoke. She was not a stranger to powerful men. She'd bested them in boardrooms, dismantled their arguments with cold, hard data. But this was different. His power wasn't in spreadsheets or stock prices. It was in the utter stillness of his hands, the lethal economy of his movements, the weight of his name. Ishikawa. The name felt heavy, ancient. They arrived at a residential skyscraper that pierced the clouds, its facade a sheer wall of dark glass and steel. A private elevator took them straight to the penthouse without a single stop. The doors opened directly into a sprawling, minimalist space. Polished concrete floors, floor-to-ceiling windows on three sides showcasing a breathtaking panorama of Tokyo. The furniture was sparse, expensive, and black. It was less a home and more a fortress in the sky. A man in a dark suit, older and with a deeply lined face, met them at the door, bowing low. "Ishikawa-sama." "Is the suite secure, Ria?" Kaido asked, shrugging out of his suit jacket. Underneath, he wore a simple white shirt that did little to hide the powerful musculature of his chest and shoulders. "Completely," the man, Ryu, replied. No one followed. Kaido nodded, then finally looked at Nia. "You will be safe here." "Safe from what?" Nia asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "Who were those men? Why did they think I was waiting for you?" He walked over to a wet bar carved from a single piece of black marble and poured 2 fingers of amber liquid into a heavy crystal glass. He didn't offer her one. "They are Hashimoto Gumi, a rival clan. They are dogs who mistake noise for strength. They likely saw you, a foreigner dining alone in a place I frequent, and made an assumption. An insult aimed at me. using you as the messenger.
Clan.
The word hung in the air. Yakuza. Her mind supplied the term she had only ever seen in movies. It felt unreal, absurd. She was a CEO. She dealt with code and capital, not clans and gangsters. "So this is over?" she asked, hoping he would say yes, that she could take a cab back to her hotel and pretend this was just a bizarre, terrifying anecdote. His expression was grim.
No.
I intervened publicly.
To them, that is a challenge.
To back down now would be to show weakness. They will not see you as an innocent bystander anymore. They will see you as mine. The possessive word sent a strange, unwelcome shiver through her. She walked further into the room, needing to put space between them. Her eyes fell on the only personal item in the vast, sterile space. On a low shelf, there was a single, simple silver frame. Inside was a photograph of a young woman with a brilliant, unguarded smile. She had the same dark, intelligent eyes as Kaito. He saw her looking. For a fleeting second, the cold mask of his control cracked, and something raw and painful flickered in his gaze. "My sister," he said, his voice flat. Akari. The past tense was unmistakable. He turned away, but the brief glimpse of his grief was more revealing than anything he had said. It was a wound, deep and unhealed. "I do not tolerate threats against women in my territory," he said, his back to her. "It is a personal matter." Nia understood then. This wasn't just about territory or honor. It was about her, Akari, the ghost in the silver frame. He was protecting Nia because he had failed to protect his sister. The rehook, the moment the stakes were irrevocably raised, came from Ryo. He entered the room silently, a tablet in his hand. "Sama," he said, his voice low and urgent. "The Hashimoto have security footage from the restaurant's lobby. They have her face. They are circulating it." Kaito's jaw tightened. He took the tablet, his eyes scanning the screen. Nia's own face, clear as day, stared back at her. She was no longer an anonymous symbol. She was a target. "They are looking for you," Kaito said, his voice dangerously soft. "My protection is no longer a suggestion. It is a necessity." He laid out her options with chilling precision. She could go to her embassy, but the Hashimoto would be watching. They could get to her in transit. The moment she was on the street, she was vulnerable. Or she could stay here, under his protection, until he resolved the situation. This was her moment to run. To demand to be taken to the embassy, to call her lawyers, to use the conventional tools of her world. But her world felt very far away. Her intelligence, which had always been her greatest asset, told her that Kaito Ishikawa was not lying about the danger. She looked at his face, at the cold resolve in his eyes, and she saw the brutal logic of her situation. She was in his world now, and his rules were the only ones that mattered. She made a deliberate choice. She would not be a damsel in distress. She would be a participant. "All right," she said, meeting his gaze without flinching. "I'll stay. But I'm not a package to be hidden away. What do you need me to do?" His expression shifted, a flicker of surprise in the depths of his dark eyes. He was used to fear, to compliance. He was not used to being asked for a strategy. The next few hours were a tense blur. Kaito decided they needed to move to a more secure, less obvious location. The penthouse was a symbol of his power, a known location. As they were preparing to leave via a private service garage, the attack came. It wasn't loud or explosive. It was quiet and brutally efficient. Two men, emerging from the shadows between the parked cars. Kaito moved before Nia could even register the threat. He shoved her behind him, one arm a steel bar across her chest, pushing her toward the relative safety of the sedan. A knife flashed in the dim light. Kaito met it with a fluid, deadly grace. It was a terrible dance. There was a sickening thud, a grunt of pain, and then silence. One man was down. The other lunged. Kaito disarmed him with a precise twist of the wrist, the knife clattering to the concrete. He didn't kill the second man, but subdued him with a series of short, disabling strikes. It was over in less than 10 seconds. Back in the safety of another, identical black sedan, the adrenaline began to fade. Nia noticed the dark stains spreading on the sleeve of Kaido's white shirt. "You're hurt," she said, her voice sharp. "It's nothing," he bit out, his focus on the streets outside. "Don't be an idiot," she snapped, the professional CEO taking over. "Let me see it." They were in another apartment now, smaller, more anonymous, but just as luxurious. He finally relented, shrugging off his jacket and rolling up his sleeve. A deep, clean slash ran along his forearm. It was bleeding freely. Rio had produced a first aid kit. Nia took it from him. "I know what I'm doing," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. She'd taken advanced first aid courses, a practicality for a CEO who traveled frequently to remote areas. Her hands were steady as she cleaned the wound, her touch firm and professional. He sat on the edge of a sofa, watching her, his body tense. Their faces were inches apart. She could feel the heat radiating from his skin, smell the cedar and smoke of his cologne, now mingled with the metallic tang of blood. She focused on her work, on the neat line of butterfly closures she was applying to the gash. When she was finished, her fingers lingered for a second too long on his skin. He caught her hand, his grip surprisingly gentle. His callous thumb brushed against her knuckles. "You are not afraid," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of awe. She looked up, meeting his intense gaze. The air between them crackled, thick with everything they weren't saying. "I'm terrified," she admitted, her voice a near whisper. "But I'm not helpless." He held her gaze for a long moment, his eyes searching hers. That was the moment everything changed. The barrier between them, the one that defined him as her protector and her as his ward, had just dissolved. The sniper shot was the sound of the world cracking open. A deafening crack followed by the explosive shatter of glass. The floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city disintegrated into a million falling stars. Nia instinctively dropped to the floor, shards of glass raining down around her. Before she could even draw a breath, Kaido was on top of her, his body a solid, warm shield covering hers from head to toe. "Stay down," he growled, his voice a low vibration against her ear. The intimacy of the position was jarring, his weight pressing her into the expensive rug, the scent of him filling her senses, the hard lines of his body a stark contrast to the chaos. His men were already moving, dark shapes converging, speaking in low, urgent Japanese. The attack was personal now. They hadn't just targeted his safe house, they had aimed for her. The bullet had struck the wall exactly where she had been standing seconds before. Later, after they had moved to yet another, even more secure location, a traditional house hidden behind high walls and a tranquil garden that felt a world away from the city, Nia saw the true, cold nature of his power. One of the Hashimoto men from the garage skirmish had been brought there. Ryu spoke quietly to Kaido in the garden, his words too low for Nia to hear. But she saw the look on Kaido's face. It was utterly empty. A void of emotion. He gave a single, sharp nod. Ryu bowed and walked the captive man away, towards a part of the property she couldn't see. Nia didn't need to hear the words. She had negotiated multi-million-dollar deals with cutthroat executives. She knew the look of a final decision. She had just witnessed a death sentence being passed, as calmly as if he were ordering dinner. It should have made her run screaming. A part of her was screaming on the inside. But another, colder part of her, the part that had clawed its way to the top of a ruthless industry, understood. It was the brutal calculus of survival. In his world, mercy was a weakness that got people killed. People like his sister. The war escalated into her own territory a day later. Kaido's men discovered that the Hashimoto Gumi were trying to breach her company's servers. They were clumsy, but they were persistent. "They're looking for leverage," Kaido said, his voice tight with fury. "Personal information, your travel schedule, anything they can use to predict your movements or to threaten you." Nia looked at the data stream his tech expert showed her. Her world, her company, her creation, violated. A cold, sharp anger, an emotion she was intimately familiar with, rose in her chest. "They're using a brute force entry protocol," she said, her professional mind taking over. "It's crude. I can stop it. My men will handle it," Kaido said. No, Nia countered, her eyes flashing. This is my house. They don't get to break down my door for the next hour. She worked, not as a victim, but as a CEO defending her empire. Kaido stood behind her, watching in silence as her fingers flew across the keyboard. She wasn't just building a firewall. She was going on the offensive. She created a honeypot, a false data server that looked like a gold mine of personal information. She coded a trap into it, a piece of malware that would not only trace their location but also feed them false intel. Intel she coordinated with Rio. A fake meeting, a supposed weak spot in Kaido's security detail. She had crossed a line. She was no longer just a protected asset. She was an active participant in his war, using her skills not to build something, but to help him destroy his enemies. The ambush was a success. Kaido's men were waiting. The Hashimoto soldiers who took the bait walked right into it. That night, she stood on the engawa, the traditional wooden veranda, looking out at the meticulously raked gravel of the garden. The adrenaline had faded, leaving her hands trembling slightly. She had helped orchestrate a violent confrontation. People were likely dead because of a line of code she wrote. Kaido came to stand beside her, his presence a familiar weight in the darkness. You should not have had to do that, he said, his voice rougher than usual. They came after my company, she said, her voice low. My life's work. There wasn't another choice. He was silent for a long time. The only sound was the gentle clacking of a bamboo water fountain somewhere in the garden. With me, he said finally, his voice strained, there is always a cost. And I find myself unwilling to let you pay it. It wasn't a declaration of love. It was something far more dangerous. It was an admission of a vulnerability he couldn't afford, a confession that her fate had become inextricably linked with his own. He was the head of a criminal empire, a man who dealt in death and fear, and he was admitting that the thought of her paying the price for being near him was something he could not bear. The final blow from the Hashimoto Gumi wasn't aimed at Kaido. It was aimed squarely at Nia's life back home. The story broke on an international news wire. Tech CEO Nia Adebayo, intimately involved with reputed Tokyo Yakuza boss. It was accompanied by the grainy security footage of her leaving the restaurant with Kaido. Her partners, her investors, her board, they would all see it. Her reputation, her career, her company, everything she had built was now threatened with annihilation. The enemy had found the one place Kaido couldn't protect her, her own world. The war was no longer his. It was hers. The Hashimoto boss, a man named Hashimoto Kenzo, proposed a meeting, a parley. He wanted to discuss a truce, using Nia's public ruin as his primary bargaining chip. It is a trap, Kaido said, his voice flat and cold. They were in the garden, the morning light filtering through the maple leaves. I know, Nia replied, not looking at him. But I'm going. He turned to face her, his eyes blazing with a protective fury. You will not. I will handle this. No, she said, finally meeting his gaze. Her own was just as resolute. He used my name, my work. He is trying to destroy my life, not yours.
This is my fight now.
I will not hide in your garden while you wage a war that started, because I chose the wrong restaurant. I am going to that meeting. He saw the unbreakable will in her eyes, the same will that had built a company from nothing. It was the thing that drew him to her, and the thing that was now putting her in unimaginable danger. I have a plan, she said, but I need you to trust me. The meeting was in a vast, empty warehouse on the Tokyo docks, the air thick with the smell of salt and rust. Nia walked in first, flanked by two of Kaido's men but projecting an aura of solitude. Kaido was nearby, she knew, but he had honored her request to let her handle the first move. She wore a simple, elegant black dress. She looked like a CEO at a hostile takeover, not a hostage. Hashimoto Kenzo sat at a steel table, looking smug. Miss Adebayo, he said, gesturing to an empty chair. I am glad you saw reason. Nia didn't sit. She remained standing, her posture radiating a calm authority that seemed to throw him off balance. Let's dispense with the pleasantries, Hashimoto-sen. You have made a grave miscalculation. Have I? He sneered. Your stock is plummeting. Your partners are calling for your resignation. I hold your life in my hands. You hold nothing, Nia said, her voice cool and clear. She subtly angled her body, ensuring her phone, clutched in her hand, had a clear line of sight. It was already live-streaming audio and video to a secure, encrypted server she had set up herself. You attacked me. You threatened my company. And now you are attempting to extort a foreign national. All of which, I imagine, the Tokyo Metropolitan Police would be very interested to learn about. He laughed. The police? They do not touch men like me. Perhaps not, Nia said. But the board of directors for the international consortium you launder your money through might feel differently. A public scandal involving the attempted extortion of a prominent American CEO? That's bad for business. She was bluffing, but she delivered it with absolute conviction. She was baiting him, goading him, keeping him talking. He rose to his feet, his face darkening with rage. You are arrogant, for a woman who is about to die, he gave a signal. His men moved forward. That's when Kaido's men materialized from the shadows. The warehouse erupted into controlled, brutal violence. But the real battle had already been won. Nia had the recording, the threats, the admission of his intent, the entire illegal confrontation captured and secured. She hadn't needed a weapon of steel. She had used her own. In the quiet aftermath, as his men efficiently cleaned up the scene, Kaido walked towards her. He ignored the bodies and the blood, his eyes fixed only on her. She stood unshaken, the phone still in her hand. He gently took it from her, his thumb brushing against hers. The touch was electric. You fight with a different kind of blade, he said, his voice laced with a deep, unfamiliar emotion.
It was respect. Awe.
Sharper than any of mine, he looked at her then, truly looked at her, and saw not a woman he needed to protect, but an equal. A queen of a different kind of empire. My world is not safe for you, he murmured, the words costing him something. She met his gaze, a small, defiant smile touching her lips. You seem to have forgotten. I'm not safe either. The cost was real. The deal she had come to Tokyo for was dead. Her position as CEO was hanging by a thread. She had paid a steep price for her survival. And Kaido, he had started a clan war, exposing his organization to immense risk, all for a woman he had known for mere days. He had broken every one of his own cold, logical rules. Days later, she stood on the balcony of his penthouse, the one with the repaired window. The city lights below no longer seemed like a galaxy of promise, but a beautiful, dangerous web. The news about her was a storm she was still navigating, fighting with every bit of her strategic brilliance. Kaido came to stand beside her. He didn't speak, just stood there, a solid presence in the cool night air. The silence between them was no longer empty. It was filled with everything that had happened, everything they had survived together. Finally, he spoke her name. He said it differently than anyone else, as if the word itself was something precious. Nia, then. He said the one word that mattered more than any declaration of love, more than any promise of a future. Stay. It wasn't a command. It was a plea, a request stripped bare of his power, his authority, his pride. It was the most vulnerable he had ever been, an admission that his carefully controlled world was now irrevocably centered on her. She looked from the sprawling, glittering city to the dark, intense man beside her. One was a world of ambition and risk, the other a world of violence and honor. Both were dangerous. Both were hers for the taking. She didn't answer with words. She simply turned and reached for his hand, her fingers lacing through his. His hand closed around hers, a silent, binding contract. The choice was made.